Thank you for listening to Happy Times and Places, the podcast you go to when you're trying to escape from a volcano and reality, to immerse yourself in a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary in which I, Toby Haydock, try to guess my special guests' favourite things about an episode.
Hello Toby, it's me, David J Howe here. Now you may know me as a writer, as a researcher, as a publisher of all things connected with Doctor Who, but today I'm here to talk to you about one of my favourite stories. It's a story Troughton era, as you can see my friend on the screen here, and it's the Mind Robber. Now, I believe I've got to come up with a few things that I like about this story, and you're going to try and guess or predict what I might come out with. So I'm just going to pause for a second to allow you time to talk a little bit yourself.
David J. Howe, and who very kindly recorded his contribution on video, so you are robbed of the opportunity to see him as he was sitting in front of an enviably gargantuan television screen with the paws of Patrick Troughton's face appearing on the opening titles, which made for a stunning visual to accompany his introduction. As I record this, I'm concentrating very much on the audio versions of these Happy Times and Places podcasts. Podcasts, that should give the game away. Less time to do the videos, but at the time that David very kindly recorded his contribution, I did ask people to do audio and video, so he may well make some allusions to where he is or what picture we are looking at, and you won't be, so I will do my best to fill in the gaps. David is one of the first names of fandom I ever sort of got to know in terms of, reading publications. I mean, I only got the odd fanzine here and there, but I knew his name from picking up bits and bobs. And then, of course, when fandom started to get really serious and publish, proper books and proper, fanzines that went above and beyond the sort of photostated story reviews and did proper serious research. David was at the forefront. The Frame was an excellent piece of work, and I remember being so admirable because it was a Doctor Who fanzine that didn't take its name as a pun from a Doctor Who story or a reference to something from Doctor Who specifically. So that was like, wow, it's very good. They haven't gone for Eye of Harmony or Perigosto stick or whatever. They've gone for The Frame. Makes it seem all grown up, and it was at a time when suddenly going, well, if we do something that isn't quite directly related to Doctor Who, it sort of makes it seem more grown up, and it really did. It was a really smart sort of marketing tool, if you like, and it was a very serious and well-researched publication that explored new areas. And then they did their handbooks of the Doctors and their 60s, 70s, 80s hardbacks with lots of pictures. And started delving into corners of research hitherto unexplored, and shaped a lot of our understanding of the early years of the show. Well, our correct understanding of the early years of the show. They opened up the sort of basics that we knew and delved in much more detail and gave a much more sort of fastidiously woven insight into particularly the early years of the show, but all of their stuff and their approach, really set the scene for the sort of more detailed and forensic way that we began to look at episodes and the people that were looked for and interviewed. So David is a trailblazer, and I've been lucky enough to get to know him at conventions and various other places. Always very helpful, always great to see, and he's a jolly good friend of Fraser Hines as well. I always think of David when I think of Fraser, and in fact David has helped with some of the DVD commentaries that we've done when Fraser's had to be on Zoom. David's been his sort of technical whiz. So contributions known about and unknown about in the world of Doctor Who from David, who's very kindly, I suspect, gone above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to recording his contribution to this podcast. And you won't see any of it, but you will hear him. And I'm very interested with The Mind Robber. It's a curious story, isn't it? It's atypical from, the monster doctor. It's no monsters here, really. It's all, it's the land of fiction. It's this one used to be sort of lumped in with The Celestial Toymaker for me mentally. There were the two sort of weird avant-garde stories of the 60s, The Celestial Toymaker, basically board games turned evil, and The Mind Robber, the Doctor and co encountering literary figures from fiction. My first discovery of it was in a random Doctor Who magazine that I managed to get from somewhere. I think we bought it from a shop, or it had been lying around the house because one of my older brothers had bought it, or anyway. But it was certainly an early one that we had, and I remember reading about the cliffhanger to this episode of the TARDIS exploding, and that seemed quite extraordinary. How did they get out of that? And of course, the episode guides in Doctor Who magazine didn't show that. They only gave you the cliffhangers and the cast list. And you saw in the cast D'Artagnan and Sir Lancelot. So I imagined, this was a story sort of full of those sort of characters coming in and out and doing loads. And of course, actually, a lot of them just appear at the very end, as we'll discover. And then when I got it, when I started collecting, it was in decent quality. In Bootlegsville, there was a nice copy of it, so it was easy to watch without the sort of dissonance created by rolling pictures and muffled sound and terrible quality, like an oil slick has formed to create a semblance of what television used to look like. I enjoyed it very much. And I thought it really, held together. It's a good, solid production. But it's never been sort of there's absolutely nothing wrong with it in my eyes. But I'm never sort of wild about watching it. If I want to watch a Doctor Who that's kind of my idea of Doctor Who, it's never really The Mind Robber. And yet I have very few criticisms. I remember when it was repeated. They did a repeat season when I was a sort of sixth form college student, and The Mind Robber, although the BBC continuity announcer actually one day announced it as The Mind Robbers, and I remember that, and it echoed as well. They put a bit of echo on the continuity. But I remember I was working at a cafe at the time, and run by two gentlemen called Clive and Piers. They were a very colourful pair who owned this sort of health food cafe that I worked at called the Olive Branch in Ludlow. And Clive was very, very camp, and Piers was much more sort of studious, and they were sort of chalk and cheese, but really interesting, lovely guys. And I worked for them very happily for quite a long time. But I remember Clive coming in and saying, well, it's just the same thing happens every day. It's just they see a fictional thing and then they deny it. It's not very clever. And it really sort of poured cold water on a story that I thought had been, really imaginative and different, because his major take was, to be fair, a fairly obvious shortcoming with the story. But for me, it had always been because it was so different. And because the things that I'd worried about that wouldn't quite work about it actually were pulled off very well, because it's a very solid production. As I say, I've always been very fond of it, particularly this first episode, yet without ever, sort of scanning my DVD shelves and going, oh yeah, The Mind Robber's the one I've got to watch. So I haven't watched this in a very long time. And I'm intrigued to see how I appreciate it. Obvious with the caveat that I'm talking through all the hard wrought dialogue the writer has slaved over and the actors have rehearsed, and I'm chatting away because that's the nature of these podcasts. But by way of quite a long introduction, partially because I know we've got time because it's only a 20-minute episode, but also partially because this is a difficult story for me to quantify in a way. I think it's very good. I've always admired and liked it and enjoyed it, but I never sort of go rushing back to it, and it's never one that I'd select as one of my absolute favourites, even though I actually have very few issues with it. And also, I think absolutely Doctor Who should do stories like this. I think I think for the Troughton, and I can completely understand people for whom this is a favourite Troughton, because the Troughton era is actually quite formulaic, but it's a formula that I really like, because it was the formula adopted by the stories that made up most of those early Target novels that I read, which was my sort of conduit to the olden days. So it's all about context and when you discover things and when you find them. But, the other part of me would be contrarian, go, no, because there's not many, I tend to stick up for stories that are disliked by fans because they're slightly atypical. They go, no, Doctor Who should be doing this sort of thing. So I don't know why I'm not a champion of the mind robber in a way that I might be. But anyway, let's see, because I certainly know that this is one of the finest episodes of Doctor Who of all time, episode 1 of The Mind Robber. It's an absolute masterpiece. So let us see what it has to offer. And I am going to press play in 3, 2, 1. The Mind Robbers, as that BBC announcer said. So, well, welcome. I mean, I do love a black and white Doctor Who, and I'm quite intrigued to see this because I haven't seen it for a long time. And as I say, it's one that weirdly I have a slightly mental block over. Approaching most stories, I sort of think, I know what I'm going to talk about with this one. But with this one, what I want to talk about is almost how I don't quite know how to talk about it. But I certainly always remember it was one that was in very reasonable quality. And of course, we have this slightly strange thing with season 6 is, of course, this story begins with escaping from the end of the Dominators, and curiously, it's not. They didn't do any of this at the end of the last story in order to have it in the can to start this story. This is, so it's a different volcano. I think it's just, this is all very much for this episode, and of course this story ends and sort of leads into episode 1 of the invasion. So you have this kind of continuity between stories. I love. There's almost nothing better than Patrick Troughton batting away smoke. It's got there's a kind of slight fear, desperation, and uncomfortableness that he does so well. But of course he's just come from the Dominators, where he's done no location filming, and now we're doing the Mind Robber, where the episodes are much shorter. But of course, because the regulars felt that they were carrying too much of a burden, and I'm sure we've covered that in the Seeds of Death, which I've already done, where they don't appear until quite late in episode 1. The space pirates, they don't appear till near the end of episode 1. But of course, this one they haven't quite got there yet. It's like, yeah, we'll promise we'll give you less to do. Here's an episode where it's just you three. I do like this this team, and it's David Maloney's first story as director, an atypical one for David Maloney, who would of course go on to be one of the premier directors of Doctor Who. He does this and the Crotons and the 10 parts of the War Games this season, and then he has a little sojourn with Pertwee, Planet of the Daleks, and then comes into his own, I think, with the Tom Baker, Philip Hinchcliffe, Robert Holmes era, where he does, such great work on Genesis and Planet of Evil and Talons of Weng Chiang, and of course then goes on to be a producer of Blake Seven. So. And but what an interesting idea. The idea comes from, that's a lovely model shot. I mean, the lava looks perilously like foam, but then again, everything in the Troughton era looks perilously like foam. It's not the same sort of foam as Seeds of Death and Fury from the Deep, but it's still, and cyber chest units, etc. But it's still, unfortunately, it's you only have to vaguely resemble foam, and you're invoking other key elements of the Troughton era. It was full of lava, but what a great idea that Peter Ling, famous for Crossroads, which has enjoyed a resurgence in sort of public acknowledgement recently because of Russell T Davis's series about Noel Gordon, and I watched that, and then of course was immediately on YouTube looking at old episodes of Crossroads, and my goodness, there's some sights to behold in terms of acting, storytelling, everything. I mean, in some cases a work of glorious desperation. But Peter Ling had noted how people thought that actors playing characters in soaps were mistaken for the real thing by members of the general public. I've always found that really weird, and it's always to me a sign that democracy is perhaps on perilous ground when you give the vote to people who don't know that the people on television are actors saying lines that they've been given by other people, and they're not just people living their lives that cameras just happen to be transmitting to the rest of us. I mean, that's a basic. That's as much as understanding what toast is, or how to open a door. But it's beyond a great number of the British voting public. So they've moved out of Dominatorsville into the costumes that they now wear for. Well, Zoe has that her much better that Dominator's costume was falling apart, and now she's got her sequined catsuit, which is pretty cool. But yes, Peter Ling had noticed that actors got mistaken for the characters that they played. So he thought, well, what if there's a land where fictional characters exist? And the only way you can do that is this rather interesting thing of going, okay, well, we've got to take a step out of reality, which is an unusual thing for Doctor Who, and it's not something you'd want it to be doing all the time. This has to be quite an unusual story, and I'm glad we don't keep going back to this. This is almost crying out to be a one-off, although there is a very good Steve Lyons did a New Adventures. I've not read an awful lot of those, but it was recommended to me. And it's exit called Conundrum, which brings in various elements of the land of fiction, and that really works and very cleverly sort of ties in the fictional world of Doctor Who as we know it. And I think there is a story to be told in Doctor Who where maybe the Doctor lands in the present day. It would be very, very meta, and you'd have to be very careful with it lest it be too self-indulgent. But I think there is a story to be told where the Doctor lands and people go, hello, shooting at, well, you're Doctor Who. And he goes, no, I'm actually Doctor Who. And they go, yeah, whatever, but you're an actor playing Doctor Who. Look, your adventures have been on the telly for the past 60 years. And he goes, whoa, half a mo. And it's a cunning ploy by the land of fiction to fictionalise the Doctor. But obviously, in our world, Doctor Who is fictional, but in the world of Doctor Who, Doctor Who isn't. So I think there'd be something cool to be done there. And this is nicely sort of creepy, isn't it? This tantalising Zoe and Jamie, and I love the way that Maloney shoots these close-ups and superimposes, and they're both directed to sort of be slightly sort of childishly mesmerised. And this sets up that the TARDIS here is their kind of sanctuary to this weird, unknown nothing world outside, and it's done with very simple techniques really, and acting and shooting, but the idea is don't go out of the TARDIS, and that's a great setup for the drama of this episode. It's simply don't go out. You don't need any more than that, and it's really nicely done. And of course, the idea of being tempted by something is a creepy one, because temptation, well, it's part of the original sin, isn't it? But that seems somehow worse than duping. Showing somebody something that they desire, and not out of any avarice. They've not showed her a pot of gold. They showed her home. And I love the way that she goes out and disappears. I think that is so creepy. She could have just gone out and walked into the distance, but the fact that she goes out and disappears into the whiteness, I think is beautiful. And a lovely, that would have just, lock off the camera, she buggers off, unlock it. But it's a beautiful, sort of simple trick that despite its its outcome is greater than the simplicity of its enacting, if you like. And Troughton's great at doing all of this, serious stuff. He's really, tempt. See, the word tempt is very important. I do think that makes it much creepier that you've been lured out by being shown something that that seems safe. It seems a cruel trick. Again, if it had been gold, if it had been lots of food, that wouldn't have been quite so, unpleasant in a way. And the fact that Jamie gets lost because he goes out to do the brave thing that Jamie would do and go, no, I've got to go and help Zoe. So they're being lured out, by the prospect of safety, or because they are brave, and as I say, that seems a particularly cruel trick, using sort of goodness against the person. It wasn't that the two companions were shown to be daft and didn't ignore the doctor's advice because they disagreed with him or whatever. They both had perfectly good reasons to do the stupid thing, which is to ignore the doctor. Troughton's great at all of this sort of stuff, and I like the chair being in the TARDIS control room. Now, here's a thing: it was a good quality copy that I had of The Mind Robber on, bootleg VHS, but like all videos at the time, that they weren't remastered so beautifully. So actually, whereas you can see the studio here just by nature of the fact that it's walls and floor, even though it's been painted white, there is a kink between the wall and the floor has that sort of skirting around it, the bottom of the wall. So just by the very nature of the different textures, you get shadow, and so it's not a white void. It's like a white studio painted white. But in the bootleg that I had, the quality was slightly compromised. So actually, it looked like a white void. It looked more like the white void in Warrior's Gate. So it was an example of where having a slightly compromised picture quality actually improved the experience of the episode, because when the quality is too good, you don't get the sort of the lack of shape that you really need to make this work, that you can only get if you film it not in a studio, but you can see the gap between the floor and the wall there. So it's not always nice to have it totally cleaned up. That's one of the rare examples where it's got too much perspective, as Spinal Tap would say. I do like this TARDIS team. Zoe hasn't been going all that long, and I've got a bit of a theory about Zoe that I might talk about later in terms of her screaming. I'll talk about it now. I don't see her screaming at the end of this episode being like a girl in peril screaming. I see it more as a sort of slightly strange, caterwaul of abstractedness. It's they're spinning around on the TARDIS console. She sees the Doctor. It's not a, oh, I'm scared of the monster, I'm screaming. It's more kind of, this place is a mind muck, I will say, rather than the word that rhymes with that, but that's what I'm alluding to. And so I don't see it quite in the same way as other sort of screamer companions. And Zoe is actually often tarred with the brush of being a screamer, and I don't really see her in that way, because there's quite a lot of moments where she's fiercely independent and isn't like that, and isn't, certainly is in contrast to Victoria, who screamed all the time. I don't see Zoe in that way, and I would take the scream at the end of this episode out of the screaming equation, if you like. And there's something about a bagpipe as well, isn't it? It's the perfect thing to be a sort of haunting lure, and you think of sort of the ghostly bagpipes luring people off the moors to their death. So it's a perfect medium to act as a lure, even though it has that sort of evocativeness of creepiness about it, even though it's not really supposed to, because it's for Jamie, it's supposed to be a comforting sound of home, but to us it has that sort of melancholy, frightening sort of echoing the phantom piper. So it has that with it as well. So it's got lovely. It's got it's got lovely ingredients to it, this, when it's having to do something very simple, which is basically say, you three regulars, you've got to carry the episode, and basically what you've got to do is not leave the TARDIS. See, that scream is an abstract scream. It's not saying, oh, Zoe's in peril. It's and actually when you hear the scream, she's got the smiling and the beckoning, and I love that, and the fact that they've turned from their own colours into the sort of negative, into they're all dressed in white. Again, it's a very simple device that I think works above and beyond what it is. All it is the two companions that we know dressed in white versions of their own costumes, but set against the void with that scream ringing out. The fact that this is a kind of weirdly vibed episode makes it, quite unlike anything Doctor Who has done to this point. And I think that's marvellous. Oh, see, she disproves my point there, that she screams. Ha ha ha. Okay, Zoe screams then. I still don't think of Zoe as a screamer. I don't know why. Troughton's so good at this. What a wonderful face that he has. And he's showing the sort of pain there and the concentration that he needs to have. But this is, essentially nothing has happened in this episode, but it's absolutely compelling. And again, is he going to vanish? Oh, look at that. That's so creepy and spooky. And the white TARDIS. Isn't that amazing? And again, this is none of the peril in this is the sort of peril that we're used to in Doctor Who. Strangers with guns, leering monsters, or an obstinate commander who wants to throw us in jail or thinks we're the enemy or whatever. This is the threat here is of depersonalization, of being denied the sanctuary. That's all it's saying about the TARDIS is, wherever we are, the only safe place is the, four walls or however many walls of the interior of the TARDIS. And you've got some stock costumes from Out of the Unknown, but they work perfectly well. They're good, they were hanging around in a cupboard. Bung them in Doctor Who, and they've got those lovely gun things and this effect that Maloney likes, that he uses a lot in the war games of these sort of or similar sort of. And that's a great shot, the way that Troughton runs and smothers the camera, and then we open on his back, and here they are back, and the normal colour. But so that was the threat was so abstract, the depiction of the threat was so simple, and yet I think it's really effective. I think it's really powerful, and in the context of Doctor Who at the time, where a lot of the adventures are the same. I can see why for some it was a sort of culture shock, going, this is not what we imagine Doctor Who to be. But I think it's breathtakingly original. I think this is a work of desperation. This episode is not written by Peter Ling. This is written by Derek Sherwin, although there is no writer's credit on this episode. The only episode of Doctor Who with no writer's credit. The Dominators a few episodes ago had an episode with no episode number credit. So, but I like little things like that where nothing's ever quite uniform or the same. But this has no writer's credit. And because it's written by the script editor Derek Sherwin, and is a work of, we need to add an episode to this story because of the fallout with the Dominators, where there was arguments and it was cut from 6 episodes to 5. So he's basically put a prologue onto the Mind Robber, and I think transformed it from being an interesting sort of oddball Celestial Toymaker kind of companion piece to being something rather more special. And actually, I think this episode is probably the best episode. There's a bit of repetition later, and the stakes don't necessarily seem quite so high all the time. And I think, later when they try and turn it into an Earth invasion story, it doesn't quite convince in that element. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I still think there's much joy to come. But I think this episode, for what it represents, is the ingenuity of Doctor Who. The ingenuity of Doctor Who when you've got to fill not 25 minutes, but 20 minutes with scant resources and into an existing segue from one story into another. I think it's an absolutely cracking piece of work. And Sherwin was a decent writer. And this is forewarning us about the unicorn, which comes in later. So, and a word for Jamie's costume. I actually prefer the costume he changes out of this, but I like that slightly thicker wainscot that he has, and the kerchief with the woggle that he has before he changes into the black polo neck. That they used that clip, that I can feel it, that vibration on the trailer that they did for this when it was repeated on BBC Two when I was a time teenager. And this is, look at the way Malone is directing this. He's very close on the faces of his actors, because again, it's all sort of rather abstract, and it's all about, I'm being dragged, but to where? We can't see where he's being dragged. It's being dragged into a black hole or into the mouth of a monster. It's all an abstract threat, and yet it totally reads because of the performances of the actors and because of the conviction of the direction. And this, I think, is a remarkable sequence. And if you're a kid watching Doctor Who, this is the TARDIS. This is the old reliable. This is the place you start the adventure from and end the adventure in. And it's just been blown to smithereens. And again, there's a certain abstraction about this, because when it blew up, we didn't see what was inside. You could see the sort of inside of the model, but it's not there to be entirely literal. This, and so now we've got this great sequence of it, spinning in the void, and see, I see that as a slightly sort of weird, sort of echoing, caterwauling addition to this sort of slightly odd, and the ethereal sounds and the Doctor spinning. She's pointing to him over there, and then we have him in kind of mid close up. So it's not, again, this is an attempt to suggest a sort of certain strangeness and a disjointedness. And then the TARDIS, floats away and disappears into the smoke, which I think is a fantastic episode ending. And I have to say, I think Maloney in the black and white era's episode endings are sometimes quite disappointing, because he usually fades to black before fading up the titles, and I think that takes a bit of a sting out of them. It's sort of like we draw quite slowly to a close and then bring up the titles, whereas I think the more effective Doctor episode endings are, that's why Barry lets through the screaming, it's, oh my God, whereas they're a bit more sort of slow burning and sort of, they're like chapter endings really, rather than cliffhangers, I would say, in Maloney's hands. I say that more as an observation as anything else. But that actually particularly works for that episode. I think it's I think it's a classic episode ending. I think it's really disturbing. I think it's really strange. I think all the particular ingredients, from the model shot to the fact that they're on film and the things spinning around to then the bit with Zoe, Jamie clambering on the console and Zoe screaming, and then the TARDIS console receding into the distance from a great height is beautifully put together. And the fact that they've been separated from the Doctor as well, which is not only has the TARDIS blown up, but the Doctor's been pulled away. This is high stakes stuff in an episode that's basically been about don't go outside. Why? Because it's all white. And there's some stock robot costumes out there, but we don't really know what they are. But it's basically been it's cold outside, don't go, but way more than a sum of its parts. So what's my favourite thing about episode 1? Well, it's hard. I think because episode 1 is episode 1. Episode 1 of The Mind Robber is a unique episode of Doctor Who in that way. In its conception as well as in its execution and its contents. But I think it has to be the white void. I think it has to be the simplicity of that. The fact that manages to be so scary. The fact that outside is dangerous, and yet it's not. It's not a vicious jungle with spiky plants. It's not. It's not a battleground. It's not somewhere with giant monsters snapping at the doors. It's just an eerie, spooky white void, and then the genius of the companions being negative versions of themselves, and the way that is executed. I think the strangeness of that. Well, is it that, or is it the end? Is it the episode ending? Because because it is a beautiful episode ending. The exploding of the TARDIS and the disappearance in the... I think that's probably slightly more palpable, actually, as a thing of excellence, is that episode ending. Because the blowing up of the TARDIS is a total, holy heck. And the way that it is done is very, very good. I think it's a moment that I can conjure in my mind's eye when I'm thinking about it. I can imagine every shot. I can imagine how Wendy Padbury says her lines. I can see Fraser Hines clambering on the console trying to operate the buttons. I can see the cutaways to the Doctor and the smoke, and I can hear that odd ambient sound that suggests that this is a weird, strange, abstract place. Yes, the episode ending, but I mean, I think that the best thing about episode 1 of The Mind Robber is that it is episode 1 of The Mind Robber, a unique entry into the canon that is strange and spooky and does brilliant things with barely any resources, including the resource of time, because it was written in a hurry. An absolute triumph. Not everyone's cup of tea. I can understand that. If you're used to stories with lots of hardware and lots of speaking guest characters and a palpable threat of a monstrous kind, I get it. But in the great vast mosaic of Doctor Who, which is this program of infinite possibilities and indefinable magic and flexible format, I think it does everything that a bold experiment with the format should do, and it does it very, very well. Top marks, The Mind, but with the caveat that yes, if it's not your cup of tea, I can kind of get why. But I think that's a triumph. But I'm choosing the episode ending. What is David going to choose for episode 1? And I bet he's gone to a real effort with the visuals. David J Howe. Oh yes, he's at what looks like a bar. He's got a massive bottle of something there, and a bottle of red wine as well, and a bell with wine on it. Is it going to be wine o'clock at David's house? He looks like he's wearing a sort of snakeskin type of jacket. It is wine o'clock.
So the first episode of Mind Robber, and probably my favourite thing about the episode at all, is the sound that the white robots make. They've got this really eerie, creepy, creaking noise that they make as they move around, which combined with the white void that Jamie and Zoe find themselves in is absolutely terrifying. And that's my favourite thing about the first episode.
And actually, when the camera panned up on David, there was a sign saying it's always wine o'clock. So, and David was wearing a fez, because fezzes are cool. So thanks, David. Good choice, because of course there's no incidental music in The Mind Robber. It is all done by strange ambient sound that is the result of the genius of Brian Hodgson, who is one of the great... I mean, we sing him as a hero of Doctor Who, but I still think he counts as an unsung hero of Doctor Who. He's the special sound of Doctor Who in the 60s, I think, is all through classic Who, but it transmogrifies what it does as a job. But I think the eerie weirdness that the soundscape brings to Doctor Who in the 60s at its best is a key element to what makes it a very special and a very different television program, and not just. I mean, it's to the fore here because this is a self-consciously weird story, but actually there are jungle sounds and there are space sounds that do create an odd, discordant mood that makes Doctor Who truly weird in a way that I contend it never was quite after the 60s. Maybe the odd story here and there, but I think it was a consistently sort of slightly stranger show, slightly more oddball than we often consider it to be. I think particularly the Hartnell era, where alien kind of meant alien. It meant strange. It meant weird. It didn't mean just people with blue faces and funky names, who sort of spoke like Royal Shakespearean Company actors. There was an attempt to make it, but in a way we realised that was perhaps a step too far away. But I think Doctor Who, in its sound in the 60s, there are real attempts to evoke strange new worlds, to steal a phrase from somewhere else, and that's particularly to the fore here because there's no music, and there's no music in the Croutons either. Maloney again there uses the sort of special sounds to dictate the mood, and it's a smart move. You can do it with sci-fi. It means we don't get sort of particular musical stings or stabs that underscore the drama or the emotion in the way that you expect from normal drama. But great, because Doctor Who is sometimes not normal drama, and that's what makes it special. So I think the sound that accompanies that white void that was nearly my choice, and that does accompany that cliffhanger that was my choice. I don't get the point for it, but I feel we are bedfellows in terms of our appreciation there of episode 1 of The Mind Robber. So what a treat that episode was. Strange, abstract, beguiling, nothing quite like it anywhere else in the history of Doctor Who. But I can just see out of the window. It's my childhood home. So I think I'm just gonna go and take a look out there. It looks safe. So that's why I don't normally try to do comedy endings, because I hated that. I'm Toby Haydock. Thanks very much for listening to me do happy times and places, especially if you listened to that last bit and didn't throw your phone at the wall. I'm grateful to my special guest, David J Howe, who can be found on Twitter at David J Howe 1, just the digit number 1. And to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, who include Lisa and Andrew, James Lark, Guy Lambert, Clive Lewis, Ashley Knight, Andy Kitching, Jess Jerkovic, Christopher Joyce, Andrew Jordan, Robert Jewell, Richie Howarth, Dave Hoskin, Legion Henderson, Paul Gregory, Fraser Gregory, David Green, Lisa C. Greco, James Gould, Paul Goodridge, Gary Gillett, Joe Ford, Mark Findlay Smith, John Elledge, Rob Dawson, Mark Dakin and John Curley. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you too would like to become a patron, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you get advance releases, you get bonus releases, you get monthly AMAs, that's Ask Me Anythings, quite fun, there's a community there. There are certain little trinkets that lure you up the tiers, which go all the way up to £1 billion. Nobody's filled that vacancy yet. But all the content, all the actual stuff that's sort of worth anything, assuming any of this is worth anything, is all available at the lowest tier. You're not denied anything because you're at the lowest tier, which is £3, which I still think is phenomenally generous to give to a complete stranger once a month for listening to him sort of talking out loud. So I'm grateful to everybody over there, and it's a lovely little community, as I say, and it's a really nice place to sort of hang out and talk Doctor Who. How lovely. And it's £3 a month for just a commitment to hang around. You don't actually have to do anything. If you don't want to do the monthly commitment, though, you can still donate to the cause by going to ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock, where you can just buy me a virtual coffee anytime you fancy, if you think that as a starving artist who relies on people's patronage in order to feed himself and give himself coffees, virtual or otherwise, ko-fi.com has no sort of monthly obligations. You also don't get any of the bonus materials, but it's a way of essentially throwing a tip to an artist whose work you like, if I am that. Feels a bit weird describing oneself in such a fashion, but I've got to get over it. It's the way of doing things these days. You can also follow me on social media. I'm trying to up my Instagram thing. I've learnt to make Instagram videos, and I'm using them to advertise my comedy club, XS Malarkey. That is also on Instagram. I am Toby.Haydock. XS Malarkey is XS, the letter X, the letter S, Malarkey. We're both on Twitter as well. I'm Toby.Haydock on Instagram, and I'm just Toby Haydock on Twitter. XS Malarkey hasn't got dots on either Instagram or Twitter, and these podcasts have their own Twitter feed at Haydock Podcasts. I also have a Facebook page, as does XS Malarkey. It's a lovely comedy club that runs on a non-profit making basis in Manchester every Tuesday, and I've also started a Sunday night new material night as well called Testing. Yeah, I didn't like that ending at all. I thought, oh, no, come on, try and end it on something that's. It's the sort of thing that if you're doing a documentary about something or something, the director, because they're taught to do that these days of a modern. Let's do this thing because that'd be like really funny. Whereas, of course, in the old days, somebody put a clip of Tony Hart on Twitter the other day going, "This was just, you waited 3 minutes. It was just a bit of music and a man drawing, and you waited to see." The money shot, in a way, the exciting bit, and part of it was about the anticipation, and viewers didn't need to be bombarded with other distractions. It was entrusted that the man's skill and talent would sort of lure you in, and you'd wait until he'd finished doing what he was doing. I know it's easy to sort of get nostalgic and go, oh, those were better times. But they were. And if you're new and need all this flashing imagery and gimmickry that they insist on putting on television these days, it's a monster of your own creation, and you're destroying the cultural landscape with your short attention spans and I'm being arch, by the way. That's the other thing, is you have to sometimes explain humour. Oh well, if it was a joke, it would have been funny. Yes, fair enough. But what wasn't funny was my proper attempt to be. I was just trying to do an ending, rather than just say goodbye. And I think, and I've done it a few times on the endings, as if you are a patient listener, you'll have realised I start to finish an episode, and 5 minutes later, I've done 3 or 4 false endings, and then I sort of go. It's like when you see when you see a comic who's not had a great gig, and they'll get a decent laugh, and you think, right, get out now, and they'll have a false sense of confidence because they go, oh, I've got a laugh now, so now I can end well, and then they'll try and do an ending, but it won't get as big a laugh as the laugh that they got, and then they'll go, well, I can't go now because I need to get a laugh that's at least on a par with that laugh I got, because otherwise I should have gone on that laugh, and this response is not as good as that laugh, so therefore that will be an anticlimax. So then they carry on searching for that laugh that, of course, never comes, and everyone's now going, I wish you'd gone when you're done. And I sometimes feel that about the endings to Happy Times and Places. I'll come up with a line and going, and that is me exiting through the airlock. And then I'll go, oh, yeah, but one other thing. And then I'll go, oh, no, if I'd ended when I said airlock because there was an airlock in the episode, that was good. And now I've kind of ended up going round and round in circles. So I do it when I'm emceeing as well. I'll get to a point where I'm just about to get an act on, and then I'll go off on a tangent. But I suppose it's part of my style. If I was an English cricketer, I'd go, it's just the way I play, and so even if the results are disastrous, I'm being true to myself. I think sometimes in this day and age we need to learn that being true to yourself is not necessarily good for anybody else in the world. Note to self. But yes, I think that ending I did was formulated of when. We even had political programs where they go, yeah, you're a serious grown adult watching this political show, but we are going to present this report dressed as an Easter bunny in butlins, because otherwise you couldn't possibly digest the consequences of the very serious subject that we're talking about, because you're all idiots. And yes, I do sometimes think we should just go back to doing things in a straightforward fashion. But that's because I'm a very boring middle-aged man, and the fact that I find the world baffling and slightly distasteful shows that I am no longer relevant, and which is why nobody should really listen to anything I say. Move over, Grandad, which is why I will continue to disappear into ancient television, which is a place that makes me feel comfortable and happy and enthused, and I hope it makes you feel comfortable and happy and enthused too. So rather than go in search for an ending, I'm just going to stop now.